And welcome to another fun-filled episode of that 401k podcast. Ari Rosenbaum along with Dan Venturi. Dan, how are you?
Doing great, Ari. It's beautiful. Finally, summer finally got here. It's 90 and sunny. It's great.
Yeah, it's 90 and sunny, and it's about time. Love the heat. It's my favorite. It's my favorite season. I don't go to the beach, but I still like the heat. I don't know.
Yeah, can't beat it. Cannot beat the summer.
So,
Oh, and congratulations is in order, right? Your son graduated this week?
oh yeah, middle school, which I think I think it kind of, it's just kind of ridiculous when you think about it. Like, kindergarten, they had like a whole moving up ceremony, and then the sixth grade, then eighth grade, then high school, then hopefully college and whatever. It's kind of weird because, I went to a private school and we only had the graduation in eighth grade. So it's kind of weird to do a graduation 2 years after your previous graduation. You're constantly, moving up, as they say.
Like the Jeffersons.
Exactly. I wasn't gonna sing that song though. But yeah, he graduated, then we immediately had to take him up to sleepaway camp for 2 weeks. So he's out of the loop, as they say, when it comes to the Mets, because that's the one thing he's been following, and we've been emailing him talking about how they imploded against the Phillies with that great bullpen. So yeah, summer's upon us, and we're gonna do an autograph signing on Sunday, but it was gonna be Pete Alonso, Syndergaard, and Conforto, but Syndergaard canceled because he's coming back on Sunday pitching, and Alonso got sold out, and I already met Conforto, so we're not. My daughter and I are not going to be doing that.
Okay.
But yeah, so yeah, summer's upon us. We're July, and a lot of fun.
A lot of fun.
And talking about fun,
we're headed into. We're coming up on our 50th podcast.
We're closing in. We're in the 40s now. I think this one's going to be 43.
All right.
So by the end of the summer, we'll have 50, and then it'll be a year that we've done it. Speaking about fun, the next conference, Cleveland, that 401k conference in Cleveland, Progressive Field, September 20th. This week I bought the game tickets, sitting nicely down on the 100 level. Not all of us together because Cleveland Indian tickets are, still a decent commodity thanks to Progressive Field. But it's going to be a great event. Our friends at FPS Trust are going to be part of their. They just announced that they're going to help sponsor the event. Cleveland's going to be a lot of fun. Then after that, we got Foxborough, Arlington, Texas, and then, of course, the National Conference at Walt Disney World, which March should be a lot of fun. So we're working on that. Summer we take off, which is good because everybody else seems to take off. And getting a crowd of advisors to attend the event, it's hard enough. It's going to be a lot harder in July and August, so that's why we always take off. So anyway, our topic this week is really stuff that 401k plan sponsors aren't really aware of. And, the 401k plan sponsors, I always joke, they always think the 401k plan, they could set it and forget it. They treat it like any other employee benefit that they could forget about, like, the coffee machine. And the joke about the coffee machine, I always have a joke about the coffee machine. And the reason I have a joke about the coffee machine is because I worked at a TPA. I won't name names because I worked at 2 TPAs. And I have to say that it was one of the... I've never been at a place where everybody seemed to be unhappy. At least, 75 or 80% of the employees were unhappy. Everybody was unhappy, and I was the only one who actually spoke up, and of course that labeled me as a problem. But as everybody knows, I'm not really silent when it comes to complaining. So anyway, the other employees, they never complained when the health insurance was changing for a worse. The health insurance kept on changing every year, and the employee portion always increased. Nobody complained when our 401k plan was moved to pacify a certain custodian that wasn't on our side. Um, and the funniest part was the only time the employees ever complained, this is after I left, was when the employer, the TPA, stopped providing free milk for the free K-Cup coffee. That's when people complained. So it always reminds me of that line in Airplane 2 we talked about, are you telling us the whole truth? No, we're out of coffee. And that's when people start to riot. Don't panic, don't panic. What? That's from Airplane 2, and she talks about Elaine talks about we're tad off course, and there's these asteroids smashing against the hull of the ship. Yeah, and are you telling us all? No, we're out of coffee, and that's when people start to riot. So yeah, plan sponsors are kind of that way in the sense that they don't riot. They don't understand that being a 401k plan sponsor means that they're fiduciary, and I could go on and on and on and on about how being a fiduciary requires the highest duty of care in law and equity, but it's true, and too many plan sponsors learn the hard way that being a fiduciary has a lot of responsibility.
Yeah, well, and that's been our message for the 5 or so years we've been in business is, you don't know what you don't know, and that's sort of a problem. That's a liability for you. Let folks that do know what's out there run this, right, and sort of insulate you, save you the headache. So we're banging the drum. We're starting to, you know the deal. I mean, it's slow. Winning hearts and minds is not an overnight process. But we're getting closer and closer, and things like our podcast, I think, are helping to get the message out that there's a lot of moving parts to this.
Right, and it goes hand in hand with the buck stops with the plan sponsor, and that's the second crux of it. Harry Truman, excellent president as far as I'm concerned, and he had a sign on his desk that said the buck stops here. And plan sponsors doesn't really need that sign for their desk, but they have to realize that as a plan sponsor, the buck does stop with them. And there'll be always so many plan providers who are selling 338 and 316 services who will say, if you hire me, you're going to eliminate all your fiduciary liability. Yeah, you can, but you're not going to eliminate all your liability. Because, again, delegating to a 316, 338 fiduciary still means that you still have the, duty of hiring them. Anybody who hired... What? Anybody who had Vantage benefits, the TPA 316 that was caught, indicted for stealing, I think $13 million or $12 million from plan sponsors. The plan sponsor is still on the hook as in a settler function for hiring them. So while they probably did eliminate all their fiduciary liability, they still have liability as a settlor. And that's why, of course, a lot of these plan sponsors are proactive in suing Vantage benefits. And the same thing with Matt Hutchinson. Same deal. They hired him as the plan fiduciary of a couple of MEPs. He stole money. Plan sponsor's still on the hook, even as an adopting employer for hiring bad providers. I always talk about this case many years ago. I probably mentioned on the podcast, and I just have an update on it. 9 years ago, when I started out, I was hired by a plan sponsor who had a DB plan, defined benefit plan, being audited by the DOL. The actuary conveniently died on her. The actuary was the actuary for 25 years, never provided valuation reports, gave the owner of the company bad advice on writing checks. He reasoned that if the owner had predominantly the benefits in the plan, that it was no problem to write a check from the DB plan to another company that they owned. Department of Labor said, that's a prohibited transaction. You're embezzling money. And, of course, the plan sponsor didn't have any valuations reports to back that up, that it was their money to begin with. And I was involved at the beginning with the Department of Labor with a deposition at their offices. And I think what really bothered me was at the end, I thought that this was a bad case for the plan sponsor. There was no backup. And she had used litigators in the past. And she used, the owner of the company listened to that advice of, fighting it. And I thought that, maybe they should settle. And I always talked about this case, and I kind of got pushed aside by litigators. Litigators, I didn't have any connection to them. And I looked just recently on the company, and 3 years after I, was no longer on the case, they did settle with the DOL and paid the DOL, $4 million.
Oh, yeah.
So what bothered me about it was rather, the costs of litigating it for another 3 years, what did that exactly do? I don't think it didn't help them out at all. And, this is what happens. But, the owner of the company, I knew this guy for 25 years. I didn't know this. You have a duty to monitor it as a plan sponsor, as a plan fiduciary. You have to keep on top of your plan providers no matter what. And if they go rogue, you gotta, go after them. You gotta be on top of them, and that's what happens when you don't. And this was a problem for them. And like I said, they litigated it despite my advice to the contrary. The litigators made out. And, of course, the Department of Labor made out in the sense that they got the case, it's great for a news release. They such and such company paid $4 million. They settled the claims with DOL, and it makes the DOL look great. DOL did their job, as they would say. And unfortunately, this plan sponsor learned the hard way when you're hiring plan providers that, don't do a good job. So that's what happens.
I'd say $4 million is definitely the hard way.
Yeah, especially when they could have settled it earlier and not, who knows, having gone through litigation in the past, 6 months of litigation, it's a pretty good deal. I can only imagine with 3 years of litigation, dealing with a law firm with, associate working on that, who knows how much was wasted when they could have just settled it, when I was handling the plan back then. So another thing that plan sponsors aren't really aware of is the whole ERISA bonds fiduciary liability insurance deal.
Yep. Yeah, we see that, and it's topical. We see that this time of year, right? That's one of the things the auditors want to see.
Exactly. Every ERISA plan needs to have a bond. And the problem is that that's a question on the Form 5500, and I've been through it where the plan sponsor says, no, they don't have it, and they get audited. And I've always said that that's a red flag to get an audit, that you don't have the ERISA bonds in place. And then I've had problems with plan sponsors on audit that thought, the plan sponsor thought that they had a ERISA bond, but it was like a general crime policy. And then they had to go through and purchase a specific ERISA bond. And, ERISA bond is required. Fiduciary liability insurance isn't. And we've seen a lot of plan sponsors not understand that. And
well, what's the difference? Tell our listeners what the difference is between the two.
The difference is, obviously, an ERISA bond is to protect assets from the theft by plan fiduciaries. The coverage is really small when you come to think of it's 10% or $1 million. Where does that come in play? Perfect example. I had a plan sponsor where Bernie Madoff with $3 million of a DB plan. Plan sponsor didn't have an ERISA bond in place. That was a problem, especially when the plan was under DOL audit. So that does protect the plan assets. Fiduciary liability insurance protects plan fiduciaries from litigation. The costs involved with that. And that's not required. But I do recommend that plan fiduciaries, the plan sponsor purchased that for the plan fiduciaries because plan fiduciaries could be on the hook personally for problems involved with the plan, and it's a really important thing to have.
How does that reconcile with the services of the 338?
Say that again.
If I employ the services of a 338 fiduciary, my advisor is a 338.
Right.
What do I need fiduciary liability for insurance for?
Again, if you hire 338, you're still on the hook for plan administration. There may still be interpretation on really whether the plan sponsor really is a fiduciary of some sort. So I still recommend that a plan sponsor purchase it, even if they hire a 338 or 316.
Fair enough.
The cost is negligible. It's not like health insurance.
Well, at the end of the day, everyone's going to go to court at least once, right? And that's not going to be a cheap affair for anybody.
And personally speaking, I already did that once. Being involved with Matt Hutchinson years ago. And, thank God there was a policy in place.
Yeah.
I would have gone, pulled the hair on my head if it wasn't. And cost of litigation is a lot of money. Listen, years ago, I had a client who was a big union, had a retirement plan that was part of a class action lawsuit. They had $1 million of legal expenses thanks to the fiduciary liability insurance in place. They were only on the hook for $100,000, which is a deductible. So, it stands to reason that a plan sponsor should purchase fiduciary liability insurance because it's really cost effective. It's not going to break the bank. It gives you that level of protection. And, nobody who serves as a plan trustee wants to get sued personally over a 401k plan. And, listen, it's peace of mind. And that's why I highly, highly recommend it.
Mm. Well, and it's one of the, a shameless plug here, it's one of the requirements for joining our that HR association, Matt. We require all our plan sponsors to either purchase it or, all of our adopting employers to either purchase it or have that coverage in place. So it's definitely something that Ari and I both value clearly, personally. It's definitely something important and something all plan sponsors should go out and secure. I
agree. Of course, another thing that plan sponsors aren't really aware of is plan cost. Thanks to fee transparency, fee disclosure regulations, plan sponsors can expect that annual notice about how much you're being charged, but what they really don't understand is that, they actually have to benchmark those fees that they get. They just can't look at the fee disclosure or just throw it out and do nothing with it. They actually have to benchmark their fees to determine whether the fees they pay are reasonable for the services provided. And again, reasonable. You don't have to pick the lowest provider. You have to pick one that charges a reasonable fee. You want a better service, you want to pay more money for it, good. You want a no-frills kind of house brand service, that's fine as well. But you can't pay, premium prices for no-frills service. And that's really what it's all about. And again, that's what the problem that we have with plan sponsors. Most of them don't really look at fees. Most of them don't look at disclosures, and that's the problem. Once we went to fee transparency, plan sponsors no longer had the excuse, I don't know how much I'm being charged. I think I'm being charged nothing. Well, no, it says in disclosure, you're being charged something.
Sure. Now, how frequently is it an annual thing that the plan sponsors have to benchmark?
For the smaller plans, maybe once every 2 years. Larger plans, I really think they should do it once a year. There are books on it. There's services that you could hire. You don't actually have to go out and select somebody else. But you need backup. Make sure, it's being done. And, again, DOL agents ask about it now. How'd you pick these providers? What are they charging? That sort of thing.
Yep.
And I think it's important. And they need to understand they really, really have to do it.
would the benchmarking an advisor produces suffice?
Well, if an advisor benchmarks their own fees, it's kind of conflict. But if they want to bench a TPA's fees, that's fine. Um, that is fine. To
There are
me,
fees that they'd have a conflict with. So really, the best thing is to just either go out and get one of the publications, or hire a disinterested third party or a plan administrator to benchmark it for you, essentially.
sure, absolutely. Next on the hit list that plan sponsors aren't really aware of is, again, 404C plans. We always talk about it. When we had the run up in the late 90s and every plan was moving over to a daily valued platform, the big sell for daily valued 401k plans were, okay, they're participant directed. Participants direct the investments. You're not going to be liable for any losses they sustained. And of course, when you read ERISA 404C, it doesn't really say that. Plan sponsors are only protected as long as they provide plan participants with enough information to make informed investment decisions, and having a reasonable fiduciary process of reviewing funds and whatnot. And of course, this is where I have to talk about my old law firm's plan with Pat, the HR director, who said to me, "Can you look at our plan?" And I looked at our plan, and clearly the funds weren't updated for 10 years, and plan participants weren't given any investment education and whatnot. And I said to Pat, if anybody lost money in these plans, you'd be on the hook for liability. And of course, that's what got her moving to fix the plan. And that's what plan sponsors really don't understand, that, having a fund lineup from, back in the heyday of the, early millennium isn't going to help, because obviously investments change in terms of growth, in terms of ratings and whatnot. And plan sponsors don't really understand that they, actually have to have fiduciaries, a financial advisor, to guide them through a process of selecting and replacing plan investments.
Well, so and I might have missed something you just said there, Ari, but there's definitely a line, right? A fine line between advice and education. I think we've spoken about this.
We've spoken about it. Advice is very specific to the needs of the plan participant. Education is obviously more broad, talking about investment concepts. Like, this is a large cap fund, this is a small cap fund, this is a foreign fund and worldwide fund and all that kind of stuff. At the minimum, they're supposed to get investment education.
How often should that education be provided?
To me, I would coincide it with the enrollment dates. Obviously, if it's monthly, I probably wouldn't do monthly meetings, but quarterly, semi-annual, that sort of thing.
Yep, fair enough.
Yeah, so that's a big headache. And of course, I think the biggest, and we talk ad nauseum, the biggest compliant headache these days that plan sponsors don't realize are, like we always talk about, payroll issues. Late deferral deposits, compensation not fitting within the definition, operation not fitting within the definition of the plan, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I had a client. When there's a transition at a client, and there's a new HR person that comes on board, they're always looking to make changes, find things that they perceive are wrong. So this client is very antiquated in terms of their processing, right? They still send in paper, and paper, as we all know, aside from it being 10 years past due, is just ripe with issues. In the sense it gets lost, it slips through the cracks. It's just not very efficient. So one of their prime gripes was about this, and about changes submitted through paper. And the fix was simple: just send everything online, right? Everyone on the planet, my 9-year-old daughter has a cell phone, so everyone on the planet can access provider websites, at the very least through their phone. So as the client was sort of running, focusing on this issue, we ended up moving over to the topic of payroll, and the client was insistent on basically, putting me on the spot to find issues with her payroll. And it was just so clear that she didn't understand what the heck was going on, right? Like, issues with payroll shouldn't be that frequent, and the things that we're talking about are noticeable anomalies, right? Things that are contrary to the previous trend line. And those things shouldn't happen that often, right? Like, if everyone is matching or following the definition of payroll, or definition of comp, rather, we shouldn't have that.
Absolutely.
She's just grilling me. This woman is just on a witch hunt, and I'm trying to explain to her, issues that come up, definition of comp issues, raises, things along those lines that we typically see, and she just wasn't having it. She thought like there was some sort of dynamic process that alerted her to, and I still don't know what it would have alerted her to other than what I was telling her. But I think where I'm going with this is it illustrates that even HR folks, payroll folks, don't understand the things to look out for as it relates to a 401k plan.
Right. Absolutely. But, it's just a growing concern. And, we can talk about it till we're blue in the face, but it's just amazing how many plan sponsors get caught up on really what is a basic component of a 401k plan. I mean, late deferral deposits are the basic function of a 401k plan. Taking money from payroll, plopping it into the 401k plan. And it's amazing how many plan sponsors do it. And, listen, when they do it wrong once, they never just do it wrong once. It's kind of like remember the Lay's potato chips, the commercial? You can't just have one?
Yeah, just have one.
Right. You can't just, or was it was it one of the Chips Ahoy or something? Or no? But no, that was Bet You
Pringles.
Chips.
Was it Pringles?
I don't know. Lay's potato chips, I think, was always you can't have just one. And if I'm wrong, people will correct me. But yeah, you can't. Plan sponsors just don't miss one payroll. They miss multiple payrolls. You miss one, you miss others. And it's a growing concern, and it's a growing problem. And I'm not the Maytag repairman. The whole Maytag repairman, he just sat around, and Jesse White and then later Gordon Jump would sit around and he'd be bored because he wasn't working. But as an ERISA attorney, I'll tell you that much, late deferral deposits get me busy. At any time, I have a couple of plan sponsors that have late deferral deposits and dealing with that.
Well, and they don't just come in the form of, a late payroll, right? Like, you can miss a couple of participants. Like, there are other errors that are compounded by the fact that they're late. Maybe I got that backwards, right? Like, anything that doesn't hit the trust timely, including, non-untimely issues like missed deferral opportunities, that's a missed deferral opportunity and it's a late submission.
Right. Absolutely.
So it's kind of twice the fun. Kind of like the Doublemint twins.
Oh, yes.
If you guys haven't noticed, this is a product placement episode.
Yeah, but we don't get paid for it like some of the celebrities when they show up on Conan or, some of late night events where they just do a product placement. They actually get paid for that. We're not getting paid for this.
We're not getting paid, no. The folks at Wrigley and
Frito-Lay, they're not paying us.
Lay's or Maytag, no checks are coming, I promise.
Who owns Maytag now? Whirlpool. Yeah, Whirlpool, I think, owns Maytag.
I'm going to defer to you on that, bud.
Yeah, they own Maytag. Maytag used to be separate. Now it's Whirlpool. So, yeah. I as I would say, I agree with you. Yeah, and it's important that plan sponsors have a process in place with dealing with deferrals, especially once they are late with one. They should put a process in place to make sure that it's done. Many years ago, I worked for the school newspaper, and what had happened was the school newspaper wasn't doing very well. They had full-time employees, and the executive director was, writing checks for the withholding, except the office manager never bothered to submit it and mail them. and that became a problem. And the executive director was getting threatened by the IRS that they'd be legally responsible for it and all that kind of stuff. So if you have a process in place, making sure that whoever is responsible for it actually does it, you go a long way to avoiding late deferral deposits and just being chronically late. Again, when you have people who are chronically late to things, they'll be, it's the same approach. People who are late to one deferral will tend to be late multiple times. So that's it for this week. Until next time, right?
Absolutely, guys. Have a great weekend. Enjoy the first real weekend of the summer, and we'll talk to you all soon.
You got it. Take care. Bye-bye.
All right, guys. Bye.
Okay.
All right, bud. That's all right.